May 25th, 1977 saw the release of George Lucas's Star Wars, which quickly became a surprise blockbuster hit. Often regarded as one of the greatest and most influential movies ever made, it helped change the way movies were made and captured the imagination of a generation. Star Wars quickly became a pop culture phenomenon. Over the course of this series, I will be joined by a number of Star Wars fans from across YouTube and the toy collecting community, as we take a look back at their earliest memories of Star Wars and find out what made Star Wars great. Hello Toy Collector fans, Universal Toy Collector here, and welcome to the channel. And welcome to episode 15 of What Made Star Wars Great, the series where I get to chat to like-minded people from across YouTube and the toy collecting communities and hear about their earliest memories of Star Wars and to also find out what made Star Wars great. Joining this week is a good friend of mine, BobaHicks. Hello, sir. How are you?
How's it going, Stu? Thanks very much for having me. Been really looking forward to this chat we're about to have today. I've been enjoying all your previous episodes and
Oh, much kind.
listening to the
Very kind.
stories of from all your other guests. So I'm very happy to be part of the show today.
No, thank you. And I really do appreciate you taking part in it. Now, I always start off like this. So the reason I'm doing this is because there has been a lot of negativity within Star Wars. Most recently, it seems to have got a little bit worse than previous years and stuff like that. I just wanted to hear your take on it about the negativity of Star Wars because the fandom is divided at this moment in time. I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I can understand the division among the fan base. I think, like in my case, like I'm a creature of habit, and I like what I like, and I've gone through a couple of iterations of Star Wars now, as you have too, and many of the guests on the show have, where I've seen it change like over the years and evolve, and what we have at the moment, some of it's okay, but a lot of it's not really okay. If I'm being honest with you,
Yeah,
I don't find a lot of Disney's output to be of high quality, or at least not to the standard that I would associate with Star Wars.
yeah,
Um, so I can see why there are others within the fandom that would have a similar take. And look, maybe it is that I'm just I'm getting on. We're all getting on here, and like I said, we like what we like, but I don't know that sequel trilogy. It's just I I don't even know where to begin with it. It really let me down, and then there was a little bit of a rebound in my own fandom in the form of Rogue One, which I very
yeah,
much enjoyed. I
yeah,
also enjoyed the first, season 1 and 2 of The Mandalorian was also quite good. And
yeah,
then after that, things started to get very choppy and inconsistent, and some stuff was okay, and some stuff was just awful. To be honest with you, at least I felt it was, and it's just
mm, mm,
it's been tough. But I think part of the issue is that there's actually so much content. Like we're actually
yeah,
really oversaturated with Star Wars content. When I became a fan, there was 3 movies, and that was your core, material that you kind of you based everything off. Of course, there was books and comics and loads of spin-off stuff, but as far as movies were concerned, as far as an on-screen story was concerned, we had three
yeah,
movies, and it made it special. But as the years have rolled on, and we've got whatever 11 movies now, and we've got all these TV shows, and it just feels so oversaturated. Even though they would never do this, I think the best thing for Disney to probably do would actually be to take a break from Star Wars for maybe about a year or 2 years, and just
yeah,
have a think about where it's going and what they actually want to do with it, because it feels at the moment that they just keep trying something. Like every year they'll try something new, and it can be very hit and miss. And even when it does hit, it's not reaching that high bar of season 1 of The Mandalorian or
yeah,
Rogue One,
yeah.
Star Wars story. They haven't gotten back to that peak yet, in my opinion.
Why? So I think we can both agree that there has been an oversaturation with Star Wars, definitely, and I think it's a case of quantity over quality. But the thing is, I mean, for all the issues Disney have, it's not all been bad. I mean, like you say, Rogue One, for example. I mean, I thought that was a very good film, and I think the majority of people have said that was a decent film. So they got that right. So that's a tick in the box for me as well. And then you've got season 1 and 2 of Mandalorian, which was absolutely excellent. I mean, that really did bring the Star Wars vibes back and the feel of Star Wars, which was great. And then then there's Andor as well, which was for the most part was really good. I mean, some people say it's boring, but it's sort of telling the story of the birth of the rebellion, if you will. So there's a story behind that, which I like. But why do you feel then that Disney are having so much trouble being inconsistent? Because it seems for everything they do good, there's an image of where things, or there's a side of things where it doesn't work out quite as well. Why do you feel that is? They're finding it difficult to find that consistency.
Well, I think one part of it is general quality control. The more stuff you're trying to produce, you spread yourself, then
Yeah,
you've got a lot of creative people working across multiple projects and possibly pulling in different directions, and you could get inconsistent results from that method of doing things. Another side of it is Disney, and I don't want to go on a tangent about you know politics or anything like that,
yeah,
but Disney, like a lot of big studios, they kind of latch on to certain things, whether it be like political ideas or particular trends, and they will try and kind of put those front and center on on whatever they're actually producing. And sometimes people just get annoyed about it. Sometimes it can be stupid things, and sometimes but I think people are just kind of fed up in general. Like there's a bit of a vibe of just exhaustion around Star Wars, I think, at the moment as a brand. And I think a lot of that is just the complete oversaturation of on-screen material. Like there's
yeah,
like you had mentioned Andor there. I had actually forgotten Andor, even though I
yeah,
watched it, but I'd forgotten it already because I there's so much stuff. There's like
yeah,
Kenobi,
yeah,
like the book of Boba Fett. There's been so much stuff just being churned out year after year, and yeah, it just gets to the point where it's like I feel like I barely have time to watch the stuff in the first place, and then when it turns
yeah,
out to only be maybe mediocre at best, you're kind of like, maybe I would have been better off going back and just rewatching the original trilogy. At least I know I would have
yeah,
enjoyed it, and it's something I
mm,
like already. Which I suppose, if we are talking about, the fan base being divided or whatever, as a rule of thumb, I think it's better if you don't like something, like if you don't like new Star Wars,
yeah,
there's no point in, punishing yourself and continuously making yourself watch it and, dwelling on it and getting into arguments about whether it's good or not. If you don't like it, I say, look, just go watch the old stuff. That's what I
yeah.
try and do most of the time. And
I mean, I would
some
say
of the
at least.
shows,
I was going to say, I'd say at least give it a watch before you make you know, uh, uh, um, say something about it, or have an opinion about it. Because, if you know, you could say, I don't like this. Have you seen it? No. Well, how do you know you don't like it? So at least give it a watch. And again, if it's not for you, don't watch it. It's as simple as that. But I never thought we'd be in a situation with regards to Star Wars where the fandom was so divided, where there was I mean, what is it for you that lacks in the current Star Wars? What is lacking for you? What do you want from a Star Wars movie or in even a series?
well, this is a strange one because in a way, and this is going back now even before the prequels, like I was more than content with Star Wars being, just a trilogy of films.
Yeah,
I was, and
yeah,
as we went further into the 90s, I think a lot of people just kind of thought, you know what, even though he's named these, episode 4, 5, and 6, he's
yeah,
probably never going to go and make those prequels. I think people just got used to the idea that it was only going to ever be the trilogy,
yeah,
and he was never going to touch it again, especially by the time we got to say 91 and 92, and there's still no sign of another Star Wars movie. I think we all settled into the idea of Star Wars being what it was, just three movies. Then when the prequels came out, like, when Phantom Menace came out in 1999, there was a bit of a division in the fan base even back then.
Yeah.
It was probably the first real kind of ripple of discontent within the
Mm.
fan base, and even to this day, there's a lot of people who kind of write off the prequels completely. Um, I'm okay with the prequels. I've kind of
Yeah.
learned to appreciate them over the years. But at the time, like back in '99, I was one of those people who was a little bit disgruntled and not too happy with the direction things were moving in. So who's to say? Maybe in like 20 years' time, we could have this chat again, and I'll be talking about, oh, you know what, those Disney sequels actually weren't too bad in the end. After about 10 years or so, I got used to the idea of what they were and
Oh, you see,
what they were supposed to be.
I can see what you're saying there, but the thing is with the prequels, there was a story there. It made sense. I probably didn't understand it as well as I should have done when I watched it, and I was like, "Oh God, this isn't Star Wars." So I was one of the ones that was disgruntled as well. But when you look at it and you go deep into it, there is a storyline there. There is a story. I always, and I've said on this series before, I always felt that Anakin was too easily seduced by Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith. But then you look deeper into it, then you see that Palpatine was manipulating the whole situation from episode one all the way through. And it's just subtle things, the things that he says to him, how he is with him, and stuff like that. And and then then you get a better understanding of it through the animated series Clone Wars. So that gave for me the prequels a lot more understanding, and I appreciated them a lot more. So it kind of made sense. So I was like, do you know what? I probably didn't appreciate it at the time, but I certainly do now. When it comes to the sequels, I don't feel that I would feel that way because there is no real story. It's just bits and bobs here, there, and everywhere. None of it makes sense, really. I think there were wasted opportunities, and this isn't me going on saying I hate Disney and I hate Disney Star Wars. I don't. There's some bits I like, and I like Disney for the most part. But we're talking about the sequel trilogy here. It just it seemed to lack any kind of direction and story. It was very hastily done. And I don't think, for me personally, in 20 years' time, I won't be looking back going, yeah, it makes sense now. Because I don't think it will. I don't think it will. I think they got the whole formula wrong. I think they got the wrong people in to do the films to start with. J.J. Abrams, is a great director. Is he a Star Wars director? Not really. Rian Johnson, he's directed some other films. By all accounts, he's done a great job. I don't know. I've not watched any other of his films, but what he did to the Last Jedi, wow, wow. He must have been smoking stuff. It was horrendous. And then you get J.J. Abrams come back and then try and piece together and stuff like that. There was no clear story from the start, and that's what it lacked. There was no working together. It was right. I'm going to do my film. I'm going to have my say on it, and then J.J. Abrams has come back in because Colin Trevorrow was supposed to do it, and he's probably thought, well, sod this. I'm not going to do it now after that car crash of a film. It might have been other reasons. I don't know. But then you've got three mixed match films, and it just seems so out of sorts. So I don't know. And now they're trying to retcon it by adding little bits into series that we're seeing now, like for example, what was it? Mandalorian season 3 with the cloning, the Bad Batch with the cloning. Um, they're trying to fill in the gaps from the sequels, so it all makes sense. You're wasting time doing that because you're not telling the story that you're supposed to be telling right now with this series. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
I don't know. It's a mess.
it is a mess. It is a mess. And look, it's clear to me anyway, or I always got the feeling from the sequels that they're very cynically made or something like that. It felt like they deliberately tried to drip feed us the old characters. They wouldn't give us all the characters together on screen at the one time.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah,
they wanted to kind of lead us along. Oh, you'll get to see Luke in part two, and you'll get to see Lando in part three. It was just very
yeah.
I don't know, the whole thing. It was trying to duplicate the Marvel movie formula and put it in Star Wars, just without a
Mm,
plan behind it. And I think it really kind of just it for me anyway, it failed. I know the Force Awakens made a lot of money,
Yeah.
but they essentially started then just flushing their money down the toilet when it came
Mm,
to The Last Jedi and,
mm,
Rise of Skywalker. Like
yeah.
they had lost they made money, but they didn't make near as much money as they would have had people not soured on the franchise as a whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now we seem to be in a situation where Disney are almost afraid to put something in the cinema. They're just going to stick with the TV shows for the time being, and you could get lucky and get an Andor. You could get unlucky and get an Acolyte. That seems to just be in the situation that we're in at the moment. They won't
Yeah.
take any real risks. I don't think they're going to put a movie out in the cinema for a while yet until they're pretty certain that they've got like a winning idea. But knowing Disney, that winning idea could turn out to be a complete turd as well, given their
Yeah. I
past
mean,
track record.
this is the thing. You can't blame the fans if you know we want decent story, decent acting, a decent overall production. We just want good Star Wars. Disney haven't been giving that to us, and I mean, some people say, "Well, I enjoyed it." Well, good. Well done. But the majority, says otherwise, and so they've got no one else to blame but themselves. And it's really weird, and I don't like the way they're coming out and blaming the fans. Well, because of negativity and the toxic male fandom and stuff like that. You're ruining stuff. Well, no, no, we're not. You're ruining Star Wars because you don't know what you're doing. Basically, you've got people like John Favreau and Dave Filoni. They you know they done a great job with well, Filoni done a great job with Clone Wars. John Favreau and Filoni done a great job with The Mandalorian. So after when we saw those two seasons coming out, you thought, well, we want to a winning thing here. This is great, good stuff. But then they don't. They turn their back on that and then try and get. I just don't get it. Just get people in who care about Star Wars, know how Star Wars works and what it's all about, and understands it. That's your starting point. That it's as simple as that. And Disney don't seem to be doing that on a constant basis or a consistent basis. And it's interesting you saying about you know the Marvel universe. That works for Marvel. Star Wars is its own entity. It doesn't need to be anything else. It worked perfectly fine as it was. You don't need to make this massive Mandoverse where you got series overlapping each other and intertwining with each other and stuff like that, or crossing over. It You don't need to do that. Just keep it simple. It's a simple story. Good versus evil. It's all it is. And people seem to complicate it by trying to turn it into something it's not. And I think that's not helping Star Wars because Disney have got Marvel and they've got Star Wars as well. And they both work well. Marvel as Marvel with the Marvel universe, and Star Wars as its own entity in its own universe. You don't need to fix it or you don't need to meddle with it. And that's how I see it.
Yeah, and I'd largely agree with that. But I just like it's funny. Disney as well. They when they purchased Star Wars, they purchased pretty much everything under that brand's umbrella. So they had access to all those officially licensed stories that were released through Lucasfilm. I like I've some of them here at my side, like that A Heir to
Yeah.
the Empire
Oh,
and stuff like
yeah.
that. Those 90s books, and
Yeah.
they chose to pretty much ignore 99% of that lore and instead decided to do their own thing as well. Now, don't get me wrong, they weren't obliged to do those stories, but I just think if you're going to attempt, something, at least
Yeah.
maybe go back to something that's proven to already work. Like those books were bestsellers at the time.
Yeah.
They sold really well, and going back to what I was talking about earlier, back when it was only three films, reading books or reading a comic or maybe even playing a video game, you would take those extra little snippets of information you got about a character and kind of add that to your own
You would.
knowledge and
Yeah.
lore about that character, and it meant something to you. Whereas with these Disney films, like I don't know if now I could be wrong, and look, if there's anybody younger than me listening to this at the moment, please comment and prove me wrong if I'm wrong. But I can't see a young person caring to read a book about the backstory of Finn or to read a comic book about, Ray's origin story or something. I just think there's no interest. I think the characters are
Yeah,
very kind of two-dimensional and, hollow.
yeah,
Whereas the older trilogy characters and even the prequel trilogy characters, once you actually kind of start to look at it, they are rich characters with decent backstories, or at least decent, they've got the framework there where you can flesh the character out more through expanding the universe through
yeah.
books and comics. But with the new movies, like there's no character that I would see say, okay, I'll give you an example. In the Force Awakens, there's a scene where they go to this like alien cantina on that forest planet, and it's that little orange alien woman, and she knows
Maz
Han and
Kanata.
all
Yeah,
that stuff.
yeah,
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
Like there's not one character or alien in that scene that I want to know anything about, or that I want to read a short story on, or I care. I don't even know their names. I don't care.
yeah.
Like I care so little about it. Whereas, going back to say like something like the Mos Eisley Cantina or Jabba's Palace, like as a kid, I went out of my way to like learn the names of all these characters and try and read up about what their deal was, what their background was. And I'm sure, look, there's probably a little bit of rose tinted glasses looking back in this. You're a kid and you have a lot of time, and maybe you look at the world differently. But just as when I watch these new sequel movies, I just don't get any of that curiosity or any of that desire to want to know more about these characters. They just
Mm,
seem just really flat and uninteresting to me a lot of the time. Like
yeah,
Admiral Holdo, like who wants to read a story about Admiral Holdo? Um,
yeah.
who wants to buy an action figure of Rose Tico? It's just, I just don't understand what they're pushing sometimes. Like, and it all
And,
kind of, it's the snake eating its own tail sometimes, it feels
yeah,
like.
and just on that point with Admiral Holdo and Rose Tico, that wasn't down to the actresses or the actors playing those parts. They're given what they're given. They've got to do a job. It's as simple as that. But it's the way those characters were written. It was, I've said this loads of times. I thought that the writing for the sequels was lazy. It's as simple as that. Ray had so much potential. Finn had so much potential. Poe had so much potential, but the writing let them down because there was no real sort of story arc for these three characters because there was no story planned out before the films were made. I don't feel not together, not like 7, 8, 9, like episodes 4, 5, 6. The whole story was there. 1, 2, 3. The whole story was there, and they've divided it up into three parts. They didn't do that with the sequels, and and I just feel it's a wasted opportunity. And Ray could have been one of the greatest characters within Star Wars, but sadly, it's not the case. Not for me, and not for like a lot of people. Again, there's people out there that might disagree. You're welcome to disagree. That's I don't have an issue with that. But it's not because she's a female character, a strong female lead. That's far from it. But the writing let her down. And
Yes.
it's a bit it's really unfair on those guys, and I feel I really do feel that those films were wasted opportunities, and I again I think um Kathleen Kennedy, I think she had a lot to do with that as well. I thought she would have known better since she was with Star Wars at the very beginning with George Lucas at Lucasfilm. When they did Star Wars, New Hope, Empire, and Jedi. Then again with the prequels, so she's always been around that kind of storytelling and stuff like that. But yeah, it's a shame. It's a shame. Anyhow, let's crack on with finding out a bit more about you in Star Wars. So, what were your earliest memories of Star Wars?
Well, I was always kind of generally aware of what Star Wars was even before I watched the movies, because I have three older brothers, and Star Wars toys were just kind of littered around my house. So, people would just tell you, oh, that's Darth Vader, or, that's Luke Skywalker. So even though I hadn't watched the movie, I kind of had an
Yeah,
idea who these characters were and what they were supposed to be. But then I think it was Christmas in the early 90s. I think it may have been 92. ITV showed the Empire Strikes Back as like the Christmas Day movie.
Oh wow.
And
Yep.
I, for the first time, got to sit down and watch that properly from start to finish, and it really blew my mind. Like, as and even though, like, I was a little bit aware of A New Hope and I was a little bit aware of Return of the Jedi, like, I knew they existed, but I hadn't
Yeah.
watched either film properly. But I got to sit here, I got to watch Empire Strikes Back, and I was just totally blown away by it. To the point where the following Christmas, I was actually starting to ask for Star Wars stuff, and there wasn't too much stuff around in '93, but by '94, the Star Wars license was kind of starting to heat up on the toy market again, and we'd like
Yeah.
Micro Machines, you'd the Bendems. Then a year later, like the Power of the Force stuff started coming out. So
Yeah.
I was just getting all in on Star Wars. Obviously, then in the meantime, I got to watch A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, so I got to complete the trilogy, so to speak, and eventually get to watch them all in order. And oh man, Star Wars for me growing up was like a major part of my childhood, and it really consisted of watching those movies, the three movies, pretty much religiously, and also reading all these, like all the novels and
Yeah.
comics that were coming out at the time. My older brother, or one of my older brothers, was going to college, and he was buying those books. He'd read them himself, and then he just passed them down to me. So that's how I was getting my
Yeah.
supply of like Star Wars literature. But as I'm sure you remember at the time, like in the '90s, even though there had been no Star Wars movie since Return of the Jedi, like there was Star Wars stuff everywhere. Like there was a monthly Star Wars magazine, there was a Star Wars
Yep.
UK magazine, there was still comics, books, video games. It was very much a brand that was alive. So yeah, it played a major, major part in my childhood,
Mm.
on
Mm.
many levels.
Yeah. So with your figures and stuff like that, because obviously you had the figures before you actually watched the movies. Did you relate to those characters more because of the figures when you actually saw them? Oh, there's Han Solo, see him for the first time, especially I guess because it's Empire, wasn't it, the first one you saw? So Empire, and I mean, did it help you relate to those characters?
Definitely made things make sense to me, and even
Yeah.
like because the Darth Vader figure in my house, it was obviously like the old, the telescopic lightsaber arm.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't really
Yeah.
fully understand what a lightsaber was until I watched the movie. I just thought he
Yeah.
was shooting some weird laser out of his hand, like a Star
Yeah.
Trek phaser or something. I did so even little things like that, it all clicked and began to make sense. The real thing that captured my imagination was the snow battle, the Battle of Hoth at the beginning of the
Yeah.
movie.
Yeah.
That just drove my imagination wild at the time.
Yeah.
I just thought that the AT-ATs, AT-ATs, whatever you want to call them, I thought they were the coolest thing ever. I just thought the whole scene was just, it was like nothing I'd ever watched before
Yeah.
as, a 6-year-old kid. I was just My mind was blown.
So did you? I mean, blimey, 6 years old. Wow. So I guess it was more of the ships and the action that you sort of like enticed you more so than the story. I guess because at 6 years old, I mean,
Initially,
Empire's quite a deep story, isn't it? Quite a dark story.
yes.
Did you pick up what was going on with story wise, or was you like a little bit sort of like vague with it and didn't really understand what was
I
going on
was
story wise?
I definitely got the whole deal, and obviously, like, the Vader being Luke's father was
Yeah.
was still a big deal. Like, even though you may not be taking in everything, but you definitely get that kind of loud and
Yeah.
clear, what's going on there. But yeah, I think, another thing I should probably mention, that Christmas I watched Empire, we also recorded it off TV that day as well.
Yeah.
So I was going back to that tape like day after day and rewatching the movie. So I was very quickly kind of actually absorbing everything, like
Yeah.
story wise, and starting to get very curious about wanting to see A New Hope and Return of the Jedi, which luckily
Yeah.
enough I was able to shortly afterwards. But yeah, it was just a real, real excitement around it at the time. And I think the fact that there wasn't action figures readily available for the first couple of years that I started getting into it
Yeah.
made it even better that by the time '95 rolled around, I was gasping, for Star Wars toys. I was really excited about Power of the Force.
Yeah, I mean, Power of the Thought. I mean, crikey. I mean, they've got their critics, but I mean, you look back at them and they were okay. They weren't bad. I mean, they were a little bit butch to start with, but I mean, the line progressively got better. But so you saw Empire Strikes Back first, then I take it you went back to watch Star Wars: A New Hope. I mean, how did you feel about that? Because you did you like it
Totally
as much
different
as you did
buzz.
Empire Strikes Back?
Yeah, for a little while I actually liked it more.
Oh,
And for a little
okay.
while
Yeah.
as well, I also liked Return of the Jedi more. I was one of those kids, where the newest thing you see sometimes is the
Right.
best.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
way the mind
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, it was equally exciting watching the two other movies. I definitely always thought that A New Hope felt a lot different. Even as a kid, it felt a lot different compared to Empire and Jedi.
Yeah.
Empire and Jedi almost felt like they were made at the same time, even though they're the same amount of years apart. But it feels
Yeah.
almost like they're flowing right into each other. Whereas A New Hope, it did kind of stick out a little bit as being different. But it was cool. Actually seeing Obi-Wan Kenobi in action because like in Empire he's only a ghost, so I only
That's
know him
it.
as the
Yes.
ghost of
Yeah.
Kenobi.
Yeah.
So actually getting to see him do something is pretty cool. Even just seeing the Death Star, because once again they only spoke about blowing up the Death Star in the crawl. I never knew what the Death Star was or
Yeah.
how it got blown up. So stuff like that is a big deal when you're watching it for the first time as a kid. So yeah, like I was just soaking it all in, and I think in the mid 90s they did a I think they called it the remastered editions of the Star Wars
Yeah.
trilogy.
Yeah. Special
So so
editions or
so
whatever it
all
was, wasn't it? Yeah.
it was easy to get them, down in the video shop to rent them
Yeah.
regularly. And I think that was in 95. And then in 97 they did the full special edition with the whole, CGI
Oh, that's
added
it.
in and
Yeah. Yeah.
extra
Yeah.
scenes and
Yeah. I'm
all
with you
that
now.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which as a kid I actually loved that at the time. I wasn't picking up on the kind of problems that the people were having with it. I would as I got older, I'd understand exactly why people had
Yeah.
issues with it.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was just kind of excited to get to see Star Wars in the cinema because I couldn't believe like something I only knew through watching on a video at home. All of a sudden, now I'm going to get to go to the cinema and watch it. So that was a pretty cool experience as well.
Yeah. I mean, I really wish I'd have been old enough. Well, I well, I do. I wish I'd have been old enough to go and see Star Wars at the theater when it first came out. But that would have been awesome. And then Return of the Jedi. So again, you've watched that. You learn that Luke is Leia's sister. I mean, when Yoda said there's another in Empire, did you have any idea that it might have been Leia, or was that a total surprise?
That was a surprise. Return to the Jedi. I'll not lie. I actually on first viewing of that quite tearful with Vader taking his mask off and
Yeah,
Luke. That actually really I was like, oh, because I don't know what it was. I kind of always liked Vader. He seemed just, even though he's this bad guy, even as a kid there was just something quite likable about him. And I think because he'd shown a lot more of his human side when he was speaking with Luke for those moments in Return of the Jedi,
yeah,
when he kind of turned at the end to save Luke. I remember watching it for the first time thinking, oh, it's going to be happy ending. Luke and his dad are going to get onto the shuttle and they're going to escape this Death Star just before it blows up. But then when he kind of
mm.
dies there in his arms, I was just like, oh man, this is
That was
this
a
is
hard watch,
awful.
wasn't it? It was a hard watch. It
It's
was
a
quite
hard
emotional
watch.
when you think about it. It was, and it was a hard watch, and uh, I I don't know. Just there's just something about that original trilogy that I just think that even George Lucas himself couldn't quite capture that again and create it with the prequels. I mean, they're their own entity, but there's just something magical about the original trilogy, and it's really you can pick it up, you can sense it. I can sense it as well, sort of thing. But I think for the younger generation now that go back and watch it, they probably don't see what the big fuss is and what the fuss is about because the CGI it was great for its time, but compared to the CGI now, it looks dated for the most part. But for me, those films are timeless. The story will never tire of the story. I never tire of seeing that Millennium Falcon. You know, the Battle of Hoth, Jabba the Hutt. I mean, quite Yoda for goodness sake. You know, there's so many magical moments within that original trilogy, and I think it's near on impossible to recreate that this day and age.
Yeah. At least without, making a carbon copy of it, which they may
Yeah,
have tried to do a little bit with Force Awakens. I
yeah,
think sometimes as well, and even though I complain about big movie studios a lot, I know, but I have a theory maybe. When it comes to George Lucas and when it comes to a couple of other directors back in the day, back in the 70s and 80s, they had these grand visions to make something. And oftentimes the studio would put the screws to them. They're like, no, no, you have a budget. You're only allowed to do this. And they were forced to work within a kind of confined space. And then they had to become creative and inventive and think outside the
yeah,
box, especially when it came to doing visual effects. And I know I was watching one of your previous shows where you were talking about the visual effects, for making like the Death Star trench run and stuff
yeah,
like that. That's all real kind of movie making on a budget, on a tight budget really, because the studio are like, look, we've already given you X amount of money. You're
yeah,
you're starting to run over budget. You need to get this done and you need to get it done by a certain time. And I think you find it with guys like James Cameron who did Aliens, and when Ridley Scott did Alien, and these type of things, they all have similar complaints of, oh, the studio wanted this and wanted that, but I wanted to do it bigger and better. And maybe they could have, but sometimes we kind of see, especially with George Lucas, when he finally was given the reins to do it all himself with no limit to any, like he could put any budget he wanted on it. The
mm.
prequels, they're okay, like, but are any of them as good as A New Hope? At least not for me. They don't feel. It's a different
No,
thing though, and I don't like categorically saying something's better than something else.
yeah. The thing is, so how Star Wars got up and running in the first place is beyond me because, like you say, you know, I think it was 20th Century, wasn't it? Fox Studio that was sort of like tightening the reins and stuff like that, and wanted the film. They didn't want it to go ahead because they said, right, you got to stop. You got to stop. You well have a budget. But I think I, his persistence was fantastic. I mean, it was a lived in universe. And like I say, that Death Star trench was just incredible. It was so simple. But I mean, they built their cameras up from scratch. The special effects cameras that they used and stuff like that. They built all that from scratch. So then the money that they made from Star Wars then went into Empire Strikes Back. And I think didn't he put some of his own money into it as well, Empire,
Yes,
George Lucas.
that's
So
right.
he did that.
Yeah,
And he didn't want the studio turning around saying to them, right, you need to do this, you need to do that. He wanted to tell the story that he wanted to do. And, we know he went back to do the special edition of Star Wars because he wasn't happy with the cantina. He felt it could have been better. Well, to be fair, I liked it the way it was. I don't think there was any need to put in the CGI uh, special effects in at all, really, because it didn't fit in with that. It didn't fit in with the film. It didn't look right. You had characters there that were well, although they weren't real, but they looked real because they were there physically. And the CGI, I don't think really worked for those kind of films. Then 1993, 94 come along, Jurassic Park, and the way movies were made changed again because of what they did with the dinosaurs, the CGI. That's when George Lucas went, right, bang, now I can tell the stories that I want to tell and show them visually. And maybe he was too over reliant on the CGI at the time. And for me personally, visually, I prefer seeing stormtroopers in the suits or the matte paintings than what I did with like an animated or a CGI clone trooper because it looked like an animated film, didn't it? Really, some of that stuff.
I do at times. Yeah, and like
Yeah,
like I said earlier, I was lukewarm at best towards the
yeah,
prequels when I watched them first, but I've grown to appreciate them. And one thing
yeah,
one thing I do admire about the prequel trilogy, even though it's very different to the original trilogy, it still works within its own narrative. And Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and Revenge of the Sith as a trilogy, it works. The story flow works,
yeah,
and they all have a
yeah,
very similar style. Unlike the Disney sequel where it goes in one direction, then it goes in a totally different direction, and then it tries to drag you back another direction again, and it doesn't
yeah,
feel like it's coming together.
Yeah,
in any type
disjointed.
of
Yeah,
natural
yeah,
flow. Yeah, very disjointed. Whereas the prequels, like you said, George, he had a plan, even if he didn't have the finer details maybe laid out. He still had a grand vision of where the story
yeah.
needed to go. So for that, I'll always admire the prequels for being able to get
I
from A to B where they needed to
I
go in that direction.
I do wish with the prequels that he built sets and did things the old way instead of relying too much on CGI. I really do because I don't know that I think that's my only grumble. And there's a certain character as well. I think they went a little bit OTT on that character, but I mean, what for Star Wars then? What was it about Star Wars that really stood out for you?
I think initially it was just the visuals, and I
Yeah,
mentioned about that snow battle just blowing my mind.
I
Like
mean
it
that
just
sucks you right in, doesn't it? Right from the start of that film, right early doors.
so exciting, and like the fact it happened to be watching it at Christmas. It was a snowy Christmas, if I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
correctly, in '92, and it just everything was just like perfect to watch that. Lightsabers was also another thing that really took my imagination. I was one of those kids who'd be going around with with the tin foil,
yeah,
whatever I could grab that was shiny and reflective, and pretend it was a lightsaber. So yeah, initially it was the actual visual presentation that really drew me in. But on repeat viewing, it was just kind of falling in love with the characters and the story.
yeah,
And then when you start maybe building your own stories in your mind, whether that's through playing with your toys or just maybe mulling over what could be, because you know there were no prequels back then, so a lot was left to your imagination. Like I used to just imagine that Anakin Skywalker would be this kind of roguish, almost somebody like Luke Skywalker, except with a bit of an edge, maybe a mix between Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. Like that's how I would have visualized
yeah.
Anakin Skywalker. And in a weird way, maybe it was, these things can never really live up to your own imaginary machinations. So I don't think there was
Well,
any
yeah,
way the prequels would have lived up to my own expectations, no matter how good they would have been. I think I would have been harsh on them no matter
yeah.
what.
Do you think that's a problem throughout the Star Wars fandom because of the original trilogy, especially people of our generation? The expectations is so high because of those first three films that anything else, if it doesn't quite get there, we're going to know about it.
Yeah. I think so. But once again, though, when they do it right, they do it right, because
Yeah,
in Mandalorian, especially in the season two of Mandalorian, when they were going into a lot of detail about the remnants of the Empire, and we got a good look at, what it was like to actually be like still serving in the Imperial military in the aftermath of, the Galactic Civil War. And it was pretty weighty, meaty stuff that an adult could actually kind of mull over and
yeah,
enjoy. It wasn't like, childish silliness. Whereas then you could go watch, say, the Book of Boba Fett, and there's like these teenagers, racing each other on little colored in scooters or whatever. Like, it just goes, it's so inconsistent with
yeah,
the
yeah,
tone and the quality of what it kind of presents to you. Whereas I think back then it felt like to me that, especially when I was just the original trilogy, everything just the story felt like like the beginning, middle, and end. There was nothing really left to be told. Like you might wonder about what comes after or what came before, but it's not essential for you to know
yeah.
about it.
Did we
And I
need
think
to
that's
know?
the beauty of it. That's it. Did
Yeah,
we need to know? And would we ever
yeah.
have been happy to know, no matter what we were told?
So would you have been? I mean, I know you said you'd have been quite happy with like just three, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, now you've got. I mean, I guess you can you count one, 2, 3 in that as well? You happy with the 6? Did we need
But
7, 8,
see,
9?
even though like I said, I can appreciate the prequels for the most part, though
Yeah,
I consider them their own thing. And I'm not one of these people who would actually even watch those movies. I would never watch Star Wars in numerical order.
yeah,
I'll watch Star Wars in the order the movies were released. It would be too much of a stylistic clash for me to go from watching Revenge of the Sith and then just start straight into A New Hope. My brain
Yeah.
couldn't cope with that. It's such a jarring difference. Even the way it looks, the way we go from heavy CGI to all of a sudden actual built sets
Yeah.
and all that
Yeah.
type of stuff. So the way I like to watch it, if I'm watching the prequels, I will watch them by themselves as a trilogy, just like I'll watch the original trilogy by itself.
Yeah.
And like I don't always make that mental link in my mind. Like for example, like Boba Fett in my kind of head is still that, Jeremy Bulloch Boba Fett dude. He doesn't sound like the guy Django Fett. He's just, he sounds like Clint
Yeah.
Eastwood almost with his raspy voice. And like the version of the trilogy I usually watch, it's one that was released on Laserdisc, but then they did a re-release on DVD in the mid 2000s. So it's basically the original trilogy with none of the special editions. The
Yeah.
only thing that's fixed on it is the sound has been remastered on it. So
Okay.
that those are the versions of the movies I'm happy enough to watch now. They're not hampered with. Nobody's got different
Mm.
voices. There's no enhanced effects or CGI
Yeah.
Jabba the Hutts or anything like that. It's just nice and plain, the way it maybe should be.
I can understand why he's done that with Boba Fett.
Yes, I
I
get it.
can
I
understand why. So I
understand.
think
I do
I
understand.
so that's maybe the one of the okay, so yeah, we give him that. Um, how important is story to you within the Star Wars universe?
Very important because, like, if you don't care about the characters and you don't care about what they're doing, you've got a bit of a dud of a movie. And when you try to introduce something and present it as being important, when in fact it's really of no importance to the viewer at all, because up until 5 minutes ago they'd never heard of it. And the example I'll use is that weird little triangle thing in
The
Rise of
Wayfinder.
Skywalker that the Wayfinder. It's like they talk about that like it's the most important thing ever. And up until now, I've never heard about it. I've never even thought about it, and I just don't care. Like it was one of those things in the movie. I don't care. And then even there was a moment when Kylo Ren actually gets it and breaks it, and I think that's supposed to be this big ho ho moment. And I was just like, he broke it. Who cares? Like it's just
Yeah.
it was a stupid thing anyway. And
Why did they not
it
use a
just it
holocron?
I don't know. I really don't. It just felt like there's so much in that movie where it just feels like there's these storyline conveniences that they just throw in whenever it suits them to get to the
Yeah.
next moment. Whereas with the original trilogy, it felt like you were going on a journey. Like even in just A New Hope by itself, it felt like you were experiencing this whole coming of age thing. You got this young teenage guy, he just wants to break out from his boring life and get out there out into the galaxy and do something. And then all of a sudden there's this big event in his life which actually forces that situation upon him, and now you're
Yeah.
following his journey as he kind of
Yeah.
matures through it. Whereas I don't really get anything like that in the sequel trilogy. Like I'm not watching anybody really progress. Like Ray learns more tricks and skills as the movies go on, but as a character, she doesn't really progress. Like she still just stays the exact same as she did in Force Awakens. Finn and Poe, once again, they're very like I can't even really think of like did anything even happen story wise that was important with Poe Dameron? Like all I know, he's just kind of there. He just exists as this
No,
character in
again,
the
there was no real story arc with him, and there was no real story arc with Finn. And again, this has been discussed in previous episodes, but Finn was a deserter. He was a first order stormtrooper. He was a deserter. That could have turned into a fantastic story. They really could have done something with that. And they could have made something of this character, but they didn't. You know, he was a janitor at the end of the day, and that's all it was. That's what they turned him into, and he just become the butt of the joke, really. Or they tried to make him funny with in the Last Jedi, and it's the same with Poe. That conversation he had with Hux at the beginning, that's when they're in that Star Destroyer and he's in. Oh, can I speak to your mum? He said, "What? What is all
terrible.
that about?" Do you know what I mean? It's just that doesn't work. That's not Star Wars. That wasn't needed. Just I don't know that you just think what kind of direction were they kind of going with this? And I do feel sorry for the characters, the main characters, Finn, Poe, Ray. I mean, even Hux, he was like, and he was, quite what's it like full on, wasn't he? In the Force
He was
Awakens,
very
he
serious
was,
character in
he
Force
was. You're like, well,
Awakens.
okay, this guy's a bit of a nutter. He's gonna, and then he turned him into like a laughing stock in the second one in The Last Jedi. And then for him to turn around and say, "Oh yeah, I'm the mole," where did that come from? Do you know what I mean? It's just like so lazy. It's just the characters were poorly written. And again, Kylo Ren could have been great, but he's just this whiny little, do you know? Oh my god, it's such a shame.
Even
A
things
wasted
like,
opportunities.
things like the Resistance and the First Order. Like as a Star Wars fan, you can't really just present stuff to us and expect us to go along with it without asking
Yeah,
questions. Like when I started watching The Force Awakens, my first question was like, okay, who are the First Order? I can kind of get the picture that they're, the remnants of the Empire and they've gone through some changes to get to that. But nobody ever takes the time in any of the movies to actually explain that to
yeah,
somebody. Same with the Resistance. What is the Resistance? What are they resisting against? Because the last time I checked, the rebels won the war at the end of Return of the Jedi and were kind of, in the driving seat. So now all of a
yeah,
sudden, they're out of power. And it's very wishy-washy because, you know, in the Force Awakens, you get the impression that the First Order are only beginning to gather power. They're like becoming a threat. They've made this new
yeah,
super weapon, and now they're going to strike at the New Republic. And by the second movie, they've like totally taken over the galaxy and like really have the Republic on its knees. And you're kind of like what happened in between these two movies to get
yeah,
this situation? Especially since at the end of Force Awakens, the Resistance blew up their super weapon and stuff. It's just very like I was saying earlier, sometimes they'll just throw something into the story. Doesn't need to make sense. All they need to know is that it gets you to the next bit, and then the next
yeah,
bit, and the next bit.
yeah. Again, I think those films are a wasted opportunity. Again, the potential was there, but I just don't think the storytelling was there. I don't think the love and attention that George Lucas gave to Star Wars, whether it be the original trilogy or the prequel trilogy, because I mean, look, he put his lifetime work into all six of those movies. I just don't think it was there in the sequels, and and it is what it is. How important do you think the older generation of Star Wars fans are to the Star Wars franchise?
I think at the moment they are probably the lifeblood because, like, okay, like I haven't looked at the numbers and I'm not aware of how it breaks down in terms of dollars spent among age groups, but just judging by all the kind of chatter you see online and all the unsold Star Wars merchandise you see in the shops, kids aren't buying into the stuff. So if kids aren't buying into it, you're kind of depending on your older fan base to get
Yeah,
along. And now Disney, they've kind of they've snookered themselves in many ways because they're trying to pander to a youth audience while at the same time trying to please the older fan base. But you can't do both. It has to kind of be one or the other. And I don't know. Like, I will never be one of these people who would ever try to like gatekeep Star Wars from somebody or look down on somebody if they like a different type of Star Wars to me. Like if
yeah,
my niece or nephew comes in and tells me they think The Last Jedi is their favorite Star Wars film, they'll get thumbs up from me. That's great. You know, I'm just happy that you like anything to do with Star Wars. But I don't think that's happening with kids. To be honest, I just don't think it's capturing their imagination the way it did with us. So I think that Disney, if I was Disney, I would be, I know this sounds very cynical, but I would be looking at people like you and me and just trying to work out how to extract as much money from us as possible before we get to a point where we can only afford to pay
yeah,
for our medical bills or whatever.
yeah,
Because
yeah,
um, and I know I use the Admiral Holdo and the Rose Tico figures as an example, but nobody's buying a lot of this stuff. But original trilogy and prequel stuff does still sell because those
yeah,
characters are still popular. So maybe it's time just to, lay off the acolyte action figures and these type of things, and maybe just keep focused on what made you the money in the first place, because we will get tired after a while. Like if you keep on kind of
Yeah,
ignoring what we like and just focusing on new stuff, and if the new stuff isn't that good, and if it doesn't feel related to the old stuff, then eventually people like us, you can only stay interested in something for so long, or it might even get to a
yeah.
point where you might just say, "Well, look, I'm happy with the Star Wars I have now, but I'm just not watching anymore. I'm just going to stick with what I've got to here
There's a
and
lot
leave
of
it at
people
that."
are saying that. There's a lot of people are saying that. There are people that are saying that, and it's such a shame because, like you say, and they rightfully turn around and say, "Well, we've got the original trilogy, and that's all that matters to them," which is fair enough. I get that, and look, I understand this day and age. You need to move forward. You need to bring in a new generation of fans, but I I don't know. Again, this is a question I'm going to ask you: is Star Wars having the impact on today's generation as what it did when we were kids?
I honestly don't think so. Like I have two young nephews who
Yeah,
they went to the cinema to see the sequel trilogy. They saw all the movies in the cinema, and they thought they were okay. That was just it. They thought they were okay, but they had no desire to buy any action figures, or like they weren't asking for that stuff for Christmas. It just wasn't high up on the list of their
yeah,
interests.
yeah,
And this might be part of the issue as well, is Star Wars has a lot of stuff to compete with if you're trying to sell to kids at the moment. It's not the only game in town anymore as the big movie franchises go. Like there's a lot of competition there, and the kids will happily watch their Marvel, or they'll maybe not watch anything. Maybe they'll just play their PlayStations and Xboxes and not care about movies as much in general, which does seem to be a bit of a trend. Movies
mm,
in general just aren't really clicking with young people anymore. So I don't think it's had the same impact. Like the only mainstream impact I think that's really penetrated has been Baby Yoda and The Mandalorian seem to
yeah,
have gained traction with a casual audience. Like
yeah,
even say like my sisters and my niece, they sat and watched Mandalorian and enjoyed it, even though they wouldn't really be massive Star Wars fans. But
mm,
it's a very accessible show, and the fact that you've got a cutesy character like Grogu, like Baby Yoda, to kind of it will bring in extra attention when you kind of have a very cute character front and center
yeah,
like that. So,
yeah.
but of course, nothing lasts forever, and I got a little bit. This is speaking for myself now. I went a little bit cold on Mandalorian once the third season started. I just kind of
Well,
backed off a bit.
do you know what? After seeing the last, the finale of season 2 of The Mandalorian, I was just like, "Wow, okay, now we're getting somewhere. This is Star Wars coming back. We're gonna get some great Star Wars." And I was so pumped for season 3 of Mandalorian, and maybe my own expectations, because they set the bar quite high with that last episode. I mean, that was the whole series. 1 and 2 were fantastic. They did it so well. And yeah, okay, this is great. You've got me hooked again. And then on top of that, you've got the advertising the book of Boba Fett. They're promoting that, and I was like, oh wow, he's got. And I just felt so flat after watching both those
Yeah,
series. Episode 3, season 3 rather of Mandalorian and the book of Boba Fett again. Just what? How could they go from getting it so right to getting it so wrong? You've got people turning up like Jack Black and Rizzo or whatever, Lizzo or whatever her name is, and then you've got like Christopher. Is it Christopher Brown? No, Chris. Who is it?
Chris Brown is
The,
this?
yeah, yeah. No, he played
Yeah,
Doc Brown, didn't he? Christopher Lloyd, rather. Sorry, Christopher
Christopher
Lloyd.
Lloyd. Yeah, yeah.
And you've got these cameos, and you just feel that no, 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 it's not needed. Everybody wanted to be part of Star Wars. No, we no, don't. It's not about that. And I just thought that was the most ridiculous episode ever.
Well, I think it all goes back to what we were saying at the beginning in terms of quantity over quality, and this drive just keep putting out content, because Mandalorian, as it ended at the end of season 2, was almost a perfect end to just that story in general. Maybe we
Yeah,
once again did we need to go much further with that? maybe eventually in a few years' time they could have revisited it, but it was so good and it ended so well that I almost got a little bit. I didn't really get that excited when I watched Book of Boba Fett and Luke Skywalker and Grogu showed up. I was kind of a bit like, "What? What? Why are they here
Yeah,
now?"
I
And
know.
this,
Totally devalued it. Totally devalued that character, in my opinion. Those two
just
episodes for
yeah,
sure.
took took the wind out of my sails. And
Yeah,
since then, I it's been tough to kind of get that enthusiasm back. And
it's such a
once
shame.
again, I
Yeah,
wonder if they just had a bit of patience and said, "Look, we're going to leave this for a while. We're going to soak up all the goodwill that we're getting from this
yeah,
critically acclaimed show." But instead, it was like, "No, straight out. Let's put out more and more shows. We need at least one new show a year," and that's all it's been since then.
yeah, yeah, yeah. How important are strong female characters within Star Wars?
Well, they've always been important in the sense that they've always been there. So,
Yeah,
like, you can't get much stronger female character than Princess Leia.
yeah,
Um, you know, the princess who, like, she doesn't really need rescued. All she really needs is someone to unlock the cell door. The
yeah,
rescue is just incidental because they happen to be in a ship, which she also needs to escape. And that's kind of brought across perfectly when she gets busted out of the Imperial jail block in A New Hope, and she pretty much takes control of the situation straight away.
yeah,
She's
yeah,
blasting stormtroopers. She's blasting a hole in the wall so they can jump down the garbage chute. And then as the movies progress, we see her evolve into the kind of almost like hardened general, or at least leader, rebellion leader, that she grows into. So strong female characters are definitely important. Not for any type of like quota reason, or just like I'm not someone who or I wouldn't be a believer in, saying, "Oh, well, we just need a strong female character just to have in this story." As long as there's a reason for that character to be there. And there was a reason for Princess Leia to be the way she was in the original trilogy. It wasn't something
yeah,
that was just shoehorned in. Like, I
yeah,
don't think George Lucas was actually sitting there saying, "Oh, I think need to read a strong female character." I don't think that even that
yeah,
phrase probably never entered his head. He just wrote her
yeah.
the way he thought she should be written, and
But
it
he did
just
the
so
same with
happened that
Amidala as well,
she was
didn't he?
strong. Exactly, exactly. And they're important in the roles they play, within the stories they're put. We've seen, with the kind of divisiveness how, it can go the other way, and people thought that Ray was somewhat overpowered and too strong, and too powerful a female character. But once again, you get into kind of silly territory when people are, I don't know, they're maybe focusing too much on the fact that it is maybe a pushing a gender idea, or whatever political belief they're trying to push. But
Mm,
like strong female characters are important in the story, no doubt. Um, but they shouldn't be shoehorned in just for the sake of it. Like, they should actually have a real purpose and a
yeah.
reason for being there.
Well, I think every character had a female character, from Leia to Queen Amidala, even Jen Erso in Rogue
Yeah,
One.
great character.
Then you had, I mean, Ahsoka. I mean, she started off as an animated character. They put a live action. I mean, thought she was brilliant. What a great character she is. Bo-Katan. Even Mon Mothma now. I mean, she had a small bit part
Mon
in Return of
Mothma.
the Jedi, pivotal part. Then she was in Rogue One, and now she's in Andor. So, she's. It's just so yes. We don't have an issue with strong female characters within Star Wars. And again, I go on about it. Kathleen Kennedy coming out saying, "Oh well, the male toxic fans don't like strong female characters." No, we do. We don't dislike them. We just like them to be well written and have a good story arc and have character development. Do you know what I mean? Not just put there for the sake of being put there, as you've said. Um, how important is it for Star Wars to be inclusive?
Well, it is important, but it's maybe I'm in a position of privilege where I never noticed it to be something that wasn't inclusive. So, you know, I don't even really, to be honest with you, I don't even fully know how to answer that, in the sense that, like, Star Wars, it's a science fiction space opera. as far as the human characters go, we have representation across the board when you're talking about, ethnicity, gender, all that stuff. And it's always been that way, like since the original trilogy onwards. And, you're going to have aliens and all types of weird characters in it too. So I
Yeah.
think in terms of inclusivity, in terms of the characters you feature, it's always been pretty progressive in that respect. It's always had a pretty broad, array of different and diverse characters. Like everything else, though, as society changes, the media is going to change as well. So what was considered diverse back in the 70s and 80s may not be considered diverse now. So it's possible some people might look at the older films and think, oh, well, there's no Asian people in this film, or something like that. But like, it's not something I've ever dwelled on. And like I said, maybe I'm just sitting here in a position of privilege where it's never been something I had to worry about because I never felt like I was being excluded. I think I'm represented pretty well by Ewan McGregor with his red hair and red beard. So I feel like
Mm.
I'm being represented
I mean,
okay.
crikey, if I wanted representation, I just got to look at Lobot, and I so you know what I mean. It's just, so, but yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, and yeah, I again, I think Star Wars has been inclusive from the get go. Um, but like you say, times change, and what we might find inclusive back then, maybe people don't find it as inclusive as these days. I don't know, but there you are. Anyway, we've come to the top. We've gone past the hour, so I've got one more question for you. Overall, Mark, what makes Star Wars great?
Thanks the story and the characters together. And it's when you've characters you care about, it means you care about their journey and where they're going and how the story is going to end. And for me, I always wanted to know how it was all going to end up for Luke and the rebels. Like, and watching that journey, at first seeing the middle chunk of it, but then later on getting to watch it in order, in the correct order,
Yeah,
seeing that journey from farm boy to rebel hero and to eventual, savior of the galaxy, essentially. Like that is quite the story to witness. And obviously, I'm talking about Luke, but all the surrounding characters obviously have important story arcs as well, like Han and Leia and Chewie, the droids, and Darth Vader himself. Like it's strong characters, and that will always be the best thing about Star Wars to me, is the strong
mm,
characters and the story. And obviously, look, we could talk till we're blue in the face about the special effects, but I don't really think they need to be mentioned as much because it's known. Star Wars, I think, will always be known as being very visually impressive,
yeah,
as far as special effects go. But it's
yeah,
not always, at least as far as casual viewers, they don't always point to like good character and story. But I would say that it actually has good character and stories in abundance. It's got really well written characters, really well written stories, especially within the original trilogy, but not exclusive to the original trilogy, as we've mentioned throughout today's talk.
yeah. Yeah. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Um, I think story and character development and strong characters are fundamental because that's what draws you in. If you've not got a decent story, then you're not going to be too worried about the characters. The characters are going to probably be poorly written because there's no real character development. And I think all three of those elements are really key to making to what makes Star Wars great. Absolutely. Yeah, I can't disagree with that. Fantastic. Well, that has come to the end of the chat, Mark. I've got to say, again, I'd love chatting to you at the best of times, but this is, as you know, this just been love talking Star Wars with you because I know you're very big into your different franchises as well, like Motu and Transformers and stuff like that. So to get you on here and chat Star Wars and hear your thoughts and opinions, very rational kind of talking and thinking there. So thank you very much. Really do appreciate that. Yeah, awesome stuff.
Well,
Thank you.
thanks for having me. And look, I've really been enjoying this show. I've been watching along week to week as you've been putting out different episodes, and I do love hearing from everybody and their own, perspectives and memories
Yeah, yeah,
of Star Wars. And look, we won't always, 100% agree on everything, but it's sometimes it's good just to actually listen to other people's ideas and perspectives on things, because it might give you food for thought, for yourself. So I definitely appreciate what you're doing here with the
No, I
show,
appreciate it.
and
Thank you.
I wish you the best of luck with the rest of the episodes.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Like I say, that has come to the end of the chat. So thank you very much for watching. Whether you've watched or you've been listening, really do appreciate it. Take care, stay safe, and we shall see you in the next episode. Bye for now.